Yes.
Commissioner Kim,
Yes.
Commissioner Rudin,
Yes.
Commissioner Fleming.
Yes. Fabian, you still have to vote by machine. I'm sorry. Thank you. That also is unanimous. Adoption of a resolution recommending council approve TM 19-03. Congratulations and good luck. Next item up is consideration and recommendations on the proposed public draft 2040 general plan policy text. Staff report by Mr. Ketchum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just promoted you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was
Thank you.
conversing with the city attorney. Sorry about that. I have a handout for later on in the presentation. Thank you very much, Chair and Commission members. Stan Ketchum from the Long-Range Planning Division, part of the Planning Division. Been project manager for the general plan update for a while now, as Chair Fisher is aware. And tonight, we're here to present the what we call the policy text portion of the general plan. It looks like this in real life, and you received an electronic version. As the staff report lays out, a little bit of brief history while I look for a different slide. I'm going to take my own slideshow out of order. This general plan process has been a little bit lengthy with a couple of delays here and there. And the general plan policy text and the preferred land use alternative had actually been completed in 2015. And then we had the urban service, urban growth boundary delay, and we had a subsequent delay due to a work on an environmental economic development project. So the City Council had actually gone to as far as agreeing that this draft text completed in 2015 was at that time acceptable to become that part of the general plan to be moved forward to do the environmental impact report. And subsequent to that, as we've gone through the subsequent iterations of delay and further updating, we have added some new text, as I'm going to share and you've seen in the staff report tonight. So our request of the Commission and ultimately the Council is to adopt this, to approve this text with the revisions that we'll discuss tonight. And I'm going to move back to the very beginning. So, as we described in the staff report, the substantive change really revolves around the environmental justice requirements of new state law that went into effect in 2018, requiring all updated and new general plans to incorporate an environmental justice element or content that meets the state law requirements in new general plans. And as we've shown in our package, we have a draft environmental justice element for your consideration. Very brief background, Senate Bill 1000, SB 1000 was the legislation put in place requiring the environmental justice effort, and environmental justice is defined in the law as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, or income in the planning of their community. The law lays out three main steps that we were required to take, which we have completed, using the criteria in the state law to identify the area, which the law actually calls a, I just forgot the term, a disadvantaged community. We chose the term equity and engagement district as a little bit more, we thought, positive and proactive approach. We did engage the community. We had a very successful community workshop, as I described in the report, and I'll go over the results in a little bit. And then we worked very hard with our consultants, with city staff and city administration to develop some goals, policies, and implementation programs that we feel would address a number of the concerns and issues that we heard about at the community workshop. This is kind of a rounded edge version of the area that incorporates two census tracts or portions of them, and this is the area within the city limits. You can see the black dashed line there is the area that is the focus of the environmental justice recommendations. Community workshop, as I said, very, very extensive outreach was done. This is way beyond what we normally have done on other general plan parts of the process, but we worked really hard to make sure we got the word out to especially the affected community, largely Hispanic, and did a lot of work with the Nueva Vida neighborhood organization led by a gentleman named Jorge Mendoza, who was very supportive of us, and worked real hard with him to set up the workshop and make sure we had some people there to talk to. So here's just a little bit about the workshop. It was held back in November at the Gilroy Prep School over as part of the across from Rebecca Children's there, right smack in the middle of that neighborhood community. 30 members doesn't sound like a whole lot. Maybe it was a Friday night of a 3-day weekend, unfortunately. But Friday night was the recommendation of Mr. Mendoza, interestingly, and until I understood from him that Friday night is when their own community organization meets, and it's because there's no work the next day, there's no school the next day. It's easier for the community to participate. So we said, great, let's do it. So, and we did certainly have a Spanish translation. In the materials you received, the workshop summary talks about the exercises that were that we conducted, that were really a lot of Q&A and listening by staff and consultants about what are the day-to-day challenges of the residents and what kind of resources do they feel are needed. So the key topic areas listed there on the left: health issues, air, water, noise, pollution, healthcare, access to healthcare, infrastructure maintenance, that could be sidewalks, streets, even potentially water services in some areas. Financial issues are pretty understandable. Transportation, the city overall has some tough times with VTA service, but certainly in that area, the east of Monterey, east of downtown area, and the need for bicycle pedestrian improvements. High cost of housing and limited affordable housing were issues, and employment issues around poverty, which is one of the key criterias that identified that area as subject to the issues, and lack of job opportunities were a variety of issues that we heard a lot about. So the policy text revisions that we've brought forward tonight include the environmental justice, which I'll talk more and go through pretty thoroughly for you. A few very minor changes in the land use policy text. Probably the major one is just bringing in all the text from the urban growth boundary citizens initiative that's in the current general plan and has to become part of the new general plan text. There's a couple other minor revisions we'll talk about. There was Santa Clara County completed a hazard mitigation plan for the entire county, coordinating with all the jurisdictions back in 2017. It was required by state legislation, and all the cities have follow-on recommendations. There's a handful of those that are now being proposed to be added to the potential hazard section of the general plan, and then a few what I call technical cleanup revisions. And I just went over this, kind of the history of the general plan policy text. Hold on a second, excuse me. I'm going to certainly not walk through all this language one at a time, but I just wanted to mention that kind of the definition or distinction between goals, policies, and implementation programs in the general plan. A goal is something that's a general expression of the community's values about a certain topic area, and it kind of is intended to set a general direction in the general plan. Then the policies, of which you see there are a number and throughout the whole plan. A policy is a specific statement that guides decision-making regarding future actions that the city may take in trying to address an issue. And then the implementation programs, and you may have seen the different format, those are intended to be specific program actions that would be, and the city will be proposing to take on in the next, I think most of those we show would take place over the next couple of years. And obviously, they have to be folded into work programs and that kind of thing, but the implementation program items are ones that we're proposing that the city actually take some action on moving forward. So This first goal to encourage involvement, pardon me, encourage involvement of all city neighborhoods in the decision-making process. We've worked with the city's community engagement manager and talked about what efforts can be taken to start providing opportunities for translation at certain public meetings, public notices as well. Those are both significant work items that will be taking some first steps. Assess community priorities. We do this routinely when we're doing things in planning for sure and other aspects of the city, but having it as a general plan policy we felt is appropriate. Meeting accessibility is actually something that's already in place. The city's recreation website has a schedule of all the different kinds of meeting spaces that are available. Additional policies under this goal to consider all neighborhoods when the city is doing any kind of planning, especially citywide or looking at regional efforts, to be sure that we're not missing portions of the community and considering all viewpoints. Public outreach materials should be available and in translation as necessary and accessible to neighborhoods. Accessibility and transparency in our efforts producing materials. The last one, leveraging plans and programs. That's one we came up with after we noticed that this area that we call the equity engagement area overlaps almost 100% with other designated areas such as the opportunity zones that the state has pointed out as possible opportunities for economic development. The city's neighborhood revitalization plan area right down the middle of town, the same exact areas, and those are existing programs that have efforts underway that cover a lot of the same issues. So it's, don't reinvent the wheel, look at opportunities to leverage those kind of issues, but you got to look and you got to think about it. So that's one we hope to work on. Second goal, to improve access to healthy foods, health services, and resources to enhance quality of life. Some of these I meant to mention at the beginning. You may notice that the city is probably not the main driver of some of these. We may be peripheral. We may want to encourage exploration of things. We may want to encourage partnering with other jurisdictions, with other levels of government, the county, that kind of thing. But again, we've noticed what the issues are, and we're trying to propose some policies that would be in the general plan to be addressed at some point in time, hopefully into the future, not necessarily right in the near future, but as the opportunities are made available. So these are some of the other ones around healthy foods opportunities. I'm not going to go over each one. Yeah, again, mental health service is certainly not the city's main priority, but or responsibility, but working to support the county and get their kind of services maybe more available down at this end of the county, as well as health and wellness education. The third goal, to reduce noise and air pollution impacts in the residential areas. Certainly the area between east of Monterey and over to Highway 101 has potentially some more significant noise pollution, possibly air pollution issues. These were raised by the residents in the community, existing noise as such. So we're identifying areas that we want to try and explore feasibility and see what opportunities may be out there to address some of those issues in the future. Fourth goal, to increase opportunities for and support access to employment and training resources. Again, not the city's main responsibilities, but partnering with the county employment services to at least get resources available and make the community aware of them. Employment training, it's certainly possible the city could support or participate in some kind of employment training or job fair opportunity with Gavilan, with the school district and such. So those are all the policies. Then, as I said, there's a handful of specific actions that we are proposing that once the general plan's adopted, implementation programs will be evaluated and try to start putting them in a queue somehow with the other, based on city council direction. But we say here, develop a phased implementation of Spanish translation at public meetings. I mean, this is something that would take quite a while, depending on how much breadth and depth you're putting into making translation available, both for oral translation and for written materials. A community engagement program, just, you know, the idea is to encourage more communication between our leaders and the city's leadership and the community. The mayor's out there with the coffees once a month, but there's certainly other opportunities that could be made available for the community to connect with the city leadership. Maintaining a list of meeting facilities, as I said, that's already checked, the box is checked because we already have that on the city's recreation website. Maybe we need to let people know that's where you look for it, but it is there. Identify plans, programs, and initiatives. This is kind of a little bit of an overview one, but just to make sure that, again, this is the implementation of the one about leveraging other plans in place. As I said, the inventory of existing planning programs, the city's housing consolidated plan and neighborhood revitalization strategy, the downtown specific plan update and station area master plan, which has been on hold for quite some time. There's very, very early discussions starting with high-speed rail about the how and the when of getting going on a downtown specific plan update again, which will probably occur after the general plan's adopted. That effort may start up again. Oops, wrong way. Again, the farmers market vendor resources. It's nice to be able to say we have, again, a farmers market in the city, haven't for a long time. So being able to support that, and the idea, which is, I understand, being implemented around the area, is trying to encourage vendors to accept the EBT payments, the food stamps, I believe that is. Then we move into, I think there's 2 or 3 here, implementation items around some of these noise and air pollution and water pollution issues to study the potential of a program to prepare resources for and financing mechanisms for home retrofits for noise, excessive noise or air issues if they exist. They certainly, the community certainly feels that that's the case, but certainly a program would have to do baseline studies and see what levels of mitigation would be required. Sound wall feasibility analysis, that was one that certainly the community brought up the issues of the freeway noise, and turns out there actually may in fact be some funding available from the recent measure, I forget which one it was, 2B, something, I don't know, sorry. The one that, with all the transportation funding, a little chunk of that may actually be available for some retroactive sound wall installation, so we're going to at least investigate that with BTA and see what possibilities might be, and seeing what we could do about supporting some kind of a career job fair to strengthen employment opportunities, knowledge of them. So that's all that's in the environmental justice text that we're asking you to include tonight. As I said, there's a couple little tweaks in the land use element. The main one is, again, just inserting the urban growth boundary implementation text, and I think you're probably familiar with that overall. There's a couple little tweaks in there that address the RDO, the Residential Development Ordinance. I wanted to mention those. They're very, very brief text additions to say ensure compliance with state law. And the main reason for that is basically state law has said our residential development ordinance is illegal anymore. So there had been talk actually throughout this whole general plan process that at the end of it, when there's an adopted general plan, the city would reevaluate the residential development ordinance. Well, the state has pretty much done it for us. So we won't have a residential development ordinance of the type that had been in place that managed and allocated growth and development. That's state law has eliminated that. So we just wanted to make sure we've got the text addressing the fact that whatever we do, it's going to be consistent with state law in the future. As I said, the potential hazards element has this series of new policies that are all the recommendations from the operational hazard mitigation plan from the county. I've had preliminary review of these with the fire chief, That review is ongoing. There may be some tweaks, but in general, I think there's agreement that these are appropriate things that should be in the general plan. These are not at the level of an implementation program to say there's exactly going to be steps coming forward right away, but these are the things that the county plan says that each city should have in place to be working on in the future. And this is the rest of them. Last one here about basically just don't build in the flood zones. Pardon me. So staff's recommendation is to request the commission to adopt a resolution recommending the council approve these proposed, the entirety of the policy text with the revisions that we've proposed. I did want to make one footnote here. I handed out to you, and Mr. Oliver DeGolliver is in the audience tonight, who you just saw not too long ago. He this afternoon emailed me with a request to have the commission consider a text change to, and I gave you both his email with the proposed revision. I'll let him speak to it as well, but I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that, of his proposed change to the text regarding, in the general plan, requiring that future development in the neighborhood districts requires first the preparation of a specific plan. That's what the general plan text says. There's also city council policy on neighborhood districts that also actually says either a specific plan or a master plan, which frankly are somewhat synonymous. But so that's the existing city policy on the subject, and I'll leave it at that for a minute and conclude my remarks, and I can take questions, and also I'm sure Dick want to have something to say.
Does anybody have any questions for Stan? Commissioner Kim.
Yes, thank you so much. Second time around, I think it begins to make... I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. Second time around, I think it begins to make more sense to me. I was at the BPAC meeting, and perhaps I can reiterate a question that I had asked. On page 37 of the general plan, and on the printed copy is packet page 84, but on the electronic copy is packet page 93. But it's the general plan, page 37.
What's the topic? I'll look for you there. Sorry.
Okay, so it is the Appendix B workshop comment cards.
Oh.
This is, excuse me, I was corrected that the comment was incorrect. The comment says Gilroy is predominantly Hispanic Latino and lives in the east side, yet no low-income housing is available to them. There is not representation on the city council, as all the city council live on the west side. I was corrected that at least one city council member does not live on the west side. I don't know where they live. No city council members live on the east side, so therefore they don't care about the east siders. We need districts in Gilroy. So, and that was just one person, from what I understand, that made that comment.
Yeah. As I think our consultant mentioned at the time, that one of the things we wanted to make sure we did was not have to say to somebody, we didn't include your comments. This is every word that was basically
correct or not.
Exactly. Perceptions, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. But I thought it was an interesting concept. To that point, many cities in the state of California are being forced to go to districts. Mm-hmm. At what point are we at in this regards? Are we going to be forced to go to districts?
I think I almost might want to turn to the attorney. Yeah, I don't have direct knowledge on that.
We have not been approached by any of the groups to say that we need to.
Looks like this one person is.
Yeah, and so I know Morgan Hill recently went to districts, some of Watsonville, I think, and some of them. And I know that the city attorney and the city council, I know that there have been some discussions, high-level discussions, But at this time, the council makeup seems to comply with the diversity. But this person brought up the
It's
location.
the economic
Yeah,
disparity
well,
versus
it's just,
racial or ethnic.
you know, the ethnic or racial versus, where people live. But that has not been brought to the council's attention or the city attorney's attention, so.
Thank you. That was actually very enlightening for me. The second part, if I may, I was impressed with the live interpretation service that was provided at the GPAC meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, interpretation, translation, is there a difference? Okay, anyway. So can we expect that at meetings like this that we'll have similar service in the future because of this clause?
I think that's the point. I think that's why we said phased. The city administrator reviewed our proposed implementation items and was accepting of them, which I think is an indication that, as I said, once the plan's adopted, these implementation programs and some that are behind every other element in the plan will be evaluated, and some of them will be worked into the departments of various departments' work programs. So I think that's the idea, is to at least make translation available upon request. And I think that's what, so a system and a way to do that has to be identified.
What I was impressed with, it was live. So
right,
they could look at the presentation, they could listen in the language they understood. So I noticed that a few people did take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
So was there any feedback, or was it successful? Could they actually understand?
Yes, yeah, no, I did get positive feedback. We had one whole table that I think was using translation, and actually the translator told me afterwards, actually the GPAC meeting the other night, where we had a handful of people as well, and they said they appreciated it and they were able to understand, and she's very, very professional and efficient at her work. Yep.
Thank you so much. I'm done with my questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Rodin.
Thank you for your report. Can you go back one slide where it mentioned flood areas? Does this have any impact where the sports facility is?
Well, that's adjacent to that. I don't have the general plan map here to show you, but there are flood-prone areas nearby. So, all new development, and I think this is, what we're saying here, that good planning has to be done in order to avoid things like losses and issues around flood insurance. So,
Would this be specific for just housing, or if they were to expand the sports facility, would this have any impact on that?
absolutely, the city has to follow its ordinances, flood ordinances, and ensure that all new development, including the city's sports facilities, are satisfactory in the flood provision.
Oh, okay. But it won't prevent any kind of, okay. But, excuse me. My other question is going back to, I'm sorry, I had to dig through all my papers. Under EJ 2.5, the mental health services, where it encourages the County of Santa Clara behavioral health services to improve city resident access and awareness of resources for mental health services and so on. Now that the county has purchased St. Louis, will this be able to be satisfied working with St. Louis and having some of the resources and money that the county can bring with them?
Well, I think that's a good example of the kind of partnerships and connections that this kind of a policy would encourage. Actually, after one of the other outcomes of the community workshop was that there was a member of the county health department staff there who went back to her bosses and started talking about the positive results of this workshop and the content, and we've ended up having one and another meeting scheduled with a variety of different parts of the county health department, probation, and all, to look for some of those ways to combine. And so
good.
I don't know literally that it would include the hospital, but that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. At least we're on their radar.
I
Oh,
think
good.
we are.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Doyle.
Yeah, so I guess I have a general question. How, all the goals that you listed to comply with Senate Bill 1000, how did you come up with those?
Great question. A lot of thinking. Our consultants, Minter Harnish, general plan consultants from Sacramento, are very, very experienced in general plans, community plans. They've worked all around the state. They're actually working in the Central Valley with some counties doing similar kinds of work. So they were pretty well versed on what kinds of ideas we should consider or could consider. It was a lot of brainstorming, honestly. And as I said, to find things that the city has some element of control over, you know, and an opportunity to have an effect on some of these a little more direct than others. So it's just that. We had a laundry list of ideas. We sorted out some, and we landed on this set of ideas as a first try.
So does anybody from the state review that, or is it just more symbolism coming up with some itemized things to comply with this new?
Sure. A couple of different parts to the answer. One, we are required by state law to submit a report on our general plan and the status of the implementation of our plan to the State Housing Community Development Department and the Office of Planning and Research annually. So each year we're doing that. I'm writing the report right now on last year's efforts. So we keep the state, those departments, apprised of the kind of work we're doing based on implementing our plan. Secondly, again, our consultants have been in direct contact with the State Attorney General's office, who is tracking closely something like 5 attorneys, paying attention to what jurisdictions are doing, bless you, that are working on environmental justice efforts. So we haven't been contacted yet, but this is pretty new, and that's the other thing. Our consultants really couldn't find jurisdictions that had already done some useful work that we could look at to try to not reinvent the wheel. It's we're sort of out on the front edge of this. So, but we expect that this effort evidently is going to pay a little more attention since the state put the law in place. So we expect there's going to be some looking over shoulders to see how we're doing at some point. Hope that helped.
So it looks to me like this Senate bill actually is fairly vague from what I've read through it. And so we need to just show a good faith effort of compliance, and there's really no meat to what we're supposed to do.
Teeth in effect?
Teeth in effect.
Yeah, right. We're not aware of literally any kind of efforts to, I mean, cities that are, and actually what our consultants have said, they're aware of jurisdictions, some of the counties in the middle of the state that are doing pretty much the opposite of what we're doing. We're trying. We're looking for ideas and ways to come up that are more kind of like complete, not paying attention to the requirements at all. So I think we're making a very good faith effort, and I think that's what the state expects right now.
So there's city entities that are going, just refusing to.
That's our understanding. Some counties actually out in the Central Valley. That's our understanding. So they'll be the ones that the AG will probably pay more attention to in the near term.
You done?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Questions? Okay. Dan, I'd like to go back to this letter from Mr. Oliver.
Certainly. Yeah.
And because I'm not quite sure if I understand exactly what he's asking for.
You want to have Dick?
Well, first I want clarification. I'm sure he's going to speak, but I'd like to
Yeah, of
clarification first. This language that he's referring to, it's in the new general plan. Was it in the old general plan, the 2020 plan?
Yes. What you have, the second page, which I gave you. Actually, let me back up. In the current 2020 general plan, the neighborhood district text is actually a lot more extensive. This is sort of condensed, but it does say have the same language. The requirement for a specific plan has been in place and is in the current general plan. Yes.
Okay. And he has a comment here that the city is to pay for the general specific plan. Does the city pay for the specific plan?
No, not to date. Our experience thus far, Hecker Pass and Glen Loma Ranch, both paid for by the property owners. I mean, those were somewhat different situations. Glen Loma Ranch was pretty much, very, very limited ownership, group, if you will. Hecker Pass had, I think, 18 different property owners that were brought together, and I know that's one of Dick's issues as the number of property owners, that kind of thing. So, but no, those were both paid for completely by the property owners.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. Oh, Commissioner Doyle.
Has anybody looked into how much this will cost to implement these goals?
No. The environmental justice, I'm sorry, I didn't clarify.
Well, I mean, things like making sure there's a Spanish translator at meetings, something to do with air pollution, with a premise that, quite frankly, I don't know that I would accept. There's differences in air pollution, for example, in some parts of the city versus others. And, you know, obviously it would cost a horrendous amount of money to try and substantiate that with some actual evidence. But turning the corner, we're tasked with complying with this state bill. Has anybody looked into how much it will cost to be in compliance versus the other route, which is, you know, ignore it, like some of the Central Valley folks are doing, or whoever,
Right. Yeah,
whoever
no,
you said.
First part of your question, no, there's been no effort yet to try to do any kind of cost analysis, and I think that's why we were trying to be careful in our language here to say, you know, conduct a feasibility analysis, you know, which certainly would involve cost and cost benefit, and also, like you say, would establish whether or not the perceived, whether it's water or air or noise pollution, you know, is that exceeding norms for the other parts of the community? I mean, certainly noise is more prevalent next to a freeway, so, you know, you're right. There's a lot of work to be done on feasibility level before you even get going, and our language there says we need to look for funding sources even to do the feasibility studies. So, yeah, there's issues to get there first.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Storga.
I think I have a similar question. So for any language in the general plan, there's some language that is stronger than others where strive for, and there's language that there's word use like insurers. So that's very different than, you know, could or be passionate about something. Insurers is more direct in my mind. So if anyone on the commission or staff or the council were to make a decision that was non-compliant with the general plan, it would be to do something other than insure, right? Is that a fair assessment?
I'm sorry, could you say it again? I didn't quite
So there is
understand the
strong
last
language
part of
in
this.
this draft.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out if a decision was made that is inconsistent with what is written in the general plan, that could be notice for objection to whatever action or decision that would be, based on that inconsistency with the plan.
Well, I think that's why we, as I was explaining, the goals and the policies are not time-bound. They are, you know, unless, if you see some, and I'm not sure there are hardly any that say, the city shall do this. That's pretty much of a mandate. But you won't find that very often, because we have to get to that implementation program level, and there are implementation programs in each section of the plan that say of the direction these goals and policies set, these are the actions that the city wants to take. Those still are dependent on budget, are dependent on workload, work programming of the city. So I don't know that there's going to be any kind of punitive action from the city not taking an effort unless it's mandated by law somehow.
Can I maybe add some context? Can you go back a couple slides? There was something about make decisions that would consider all neighborhoods. I think back still a couple more slides.
Yeah, that's a policy, right?
One of the first ones.
Right.
Maybe two slides, one more slide. Consider all neighborhoods. So if someone were to say, I don't like a decision, I don't like an action, and there was an ability to prove that through that decision-making process, there wasn't a quantifiable consideration of all neighborhoods, that decision would be inconsistent with the general plan.
Again, it maybe comes down to what the words inconsistent with the general plan are somewhat loaded, or can be, you know, in certain circumstances. So again, I think it gets to whether or not there's some legal implication there. I think the fact, if we, like you say, have left out some neighborhoods in consideration, you know, shame on us. I mean, that's something, and it really came to light in this process, and that's why we put it in there. So, yeah, I don't know if inconsistent with the plan is maybe the right wording. I guess it's literally, it could be considered that. But these are things that the city is striving to achieve, but we may miss sometimes.
And I don't think that's unique to Gilroy's general plan. I
Ooh,
think
no.
general plans typically
Right.
have language like that. But it does also cause pause because there is something about ensuring access to parks. And ensure means something very powerful when I read it that way. So
And, you know, that's an interesting example because the city has a parks master plan. That is the embodiment of the implementation of the general plan in terms of, and it's very old, but it's very detailed about the where, the how much, the financing, that's a very comprehensive implementation for that, in which I think you could almost say that's, doing our best to ensure that, everybody has access to parks.
it doesn't say do our best to ensure.
No.
It says ensure.
Ensure.
That's where I'm caught up. I have an entirely separate question, if I may. So if you can remind us, it's related to Measure H and the urban growth boundary. So I'm looking at packet page 94 of the printed document. It's under the growth and change section. Does Measure H require us to insert this description of the urban growth boundary, or is that staff's decision? I have a question about that second paragraph, essentially.
This language, Measure H, when it was passed, modified the general plan. That was an amendment to the general plan, the existing general plan, and so, and we're certainly not allowed to change it. So that's why it has to be in here word for word in this way.
But I think if you look at what I'm referencing, there's a summary level narrative of what feels like
In 2016, the people.
the paragraph starts with the city of Gilroy's UGB reflects the commitment to direct
Right.
future growth.
Yeah, that's
et
all
cetera,
part
et
of
cetera.
it. That was a preamble in the initiative language. Yeah. Yeah, I double checked that because I had the same question, actually.
That's very interesting to learn. 'Cause it feels like, again, ambiguous and unfortunately unenforceable if we had to reference the general plan for a decision.
That was language we didn't have control over, in a word.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Are we going to consider?
We're going to open public comment next. Thank you, Stan. I'm going to open public comment. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on this issue? Do you have any cards?
Yeah, I have one comment card from Dick Oliver.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. I appreciate the staff report and also your including the comments that I emailed to you. I wasn't sure I could make it this evening. Had some health issues, and I thought it was important enough for me to make that effort, and I appreciate you giving me the time to speak with you. If you'll recall, late this fall, I was before you on the REM properties, which is approximately 55 acres for 301 homes, asking for an urban service area amendment approval and for an approval of the negative deck as part of the environmental documents. You passed that unanimously, recommending to the City Council that they approve both those requests. We were supposed to be before the City Council on December the 2nd. Because of a noticing defect, we had to be continued. Our meeting was held last Monday. We had a heated discussion. It was a good discussion, and we were approved unanimously both for the approval of the urban service area amendment and approval of the certification of the environmental documents. Now, in making the approval, the mayor made a statement, and he said, the next step for you, Dick, is to have the city file a request to LAFCO for an annexation. That request comes from the city, not from us. We can request the city, but the city has to take the step. He then said, I just want to remind you, Dick, that it may be a while before we do that because we have some other higher priorities. So what I'm saying, understand that to mean is that we have no control when we get before LAFCO. And if we don't get before LAFCO, and it might be, LAFCO may take a couple of years to approve because they're not very receptive to any changes in the boundaries. And so we realize that. And so we recognize that we may not get to LAFCO this year or next year. We hope we will. But by that time, I think the general plan will be updated. And so when I read the language of the general plan, and I realized it may be similar as to what the existing one is, and that was, I think it was on packet page 101, but I'm not sure because I lost the page number. It says land use /2 on the top of the page, and at the bottom of the page it says LU-9. But the second paragraph, and it's entitled Neighborhood District, that's the discussion. And in the center paragraph, it starts out and says, prior to approval of annexation and other land use entitlements, a specific plan shall, that's a word shall, be prepared for the entire neighborhood district area. When I was before you, we talked about that. And my statement to you at that time was that we planned to ask for an exception to the neighborhood policy, that we would actually comply with all the conditions of the neighborhood policy, but we would not be able to do a specific plan for the entire neighborhood district. As I understand it, there is only one neighborhood district left to be developed, and it's the North Central South of Day Road Neighborhood District. That district has in it 356 acres, 353 acres. There are over 60 landowners. There is no dominant landowner in the group, which means there is no Felice family to fund the environmental documents and the specific plan. The specific plan, if you remember, for Glen Loma took, what, 10 years? It's been 20 years now, and it's being developed finally. But it cost several $1 million to do. And so my position and my comments to the city council and to you and to the staff was, who is going to fund the neighborhood district specific plan and the environmental work that has to go into that? If it's ever going to be done, it was going to have to be a city or a combination of some kind of a CFD district to do that. And that could take another 10 to 20 years. We've been working for 20 years on the Wren piece. And it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, Stan, that I think the Harvest Park area was in that neighborhood district and was approved as an exception. I'm not sure.
There's an exception to the policy also.
Yeah, and I think that was the case. And so our proposal was to go ahead and make that as an exception, recognizing that we would have to comply with all the requirements of the neighborhood district as to the number of below market rate homes, small commercial piece, the density. Now the densities are going to be changed in this new general plan, so we're going to have to, we would agree to comply with those. And the other issue that we have to comply with is to make it financially neutral to the city. And so we would propose, and we said, as the environmental document suggested, that can be done by a CFD or homeowners association, but we have to do that. So we do all those things, but we'd have to be, only way we could proceed now that we have approval from both the Planning Commission and City Council, if they can grant an exception to the general plan policy, which states that you shall have a specific plan for the entire area. Now, just to remind you, we were required by the staff to prepare what was called a preliminary specific plan, and we did one back in 2018. Took that whole area and just had the engineer go out and look at possible ways you could develop it with the areas for open space and common area, but it was not a formal specific plan. It was just done by an engineer who said, yes, we could, primarily to show that the roads and the sewers and utilities would all work, because you don't want to do a specific section of it and then find out 5 years later that it doesn't work because you screwed up the streets or the utilities. So we did that. And so we believe it's possible to do that. But we don't want to get into the situation where I go back to the city council and ask them for exception and say, wait a minute, we just approved a general plan update and we have this language in it that says specifically you have to have the whole area done, and so go back and sit for another 20 years. Because otherwise, what we have just done for the last 20 years is, again, just moot. It's for naught. And so I was asking that we could insert the language in there, and I just chose some very quick language, which I suggested in there. It said that you could have an exception to allow for portions of the entire neighborhood may proceed upon approval of the city council on showing of a need or otherwise to meet RENA numbers or state requirements. I'm not sure that's the right language. I would rather ask Mr. Faber to draft that kind of language to make sure it's right, to give both the planning commission and the city council discretion, but not have to make a greater jump, which is you've got to amend the general plan to change the language, which would be very difficult to do and costly, as opposed to say, yeah, there may be reasons why we want to proceed. And one of the reasons why the city council approved our project, and you did as well, I think, is because we're going to struggle to meet the arena numbers. And this project, the Twin project, is right across the street from the Albona School. We need to improve Wren Avenue. It's surrounded three sides by the city. It's one that's logical to do all the other things in the general plan it says want to happen. But then if you say you can't happen until you do a specific plan and which requires environmental documents for 356 acres, which may be impossible or very, very difficult. And so that's why my request, I don't think it's an unreasonable one, it's one to, it's kind of prophylactic, where I'm trying to be sure that I don't get a situation where we have a new general plan and then have to come in, the first thing I ask is for an amendment to the general plan you just approved. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dick. Does anybody have questions for Mr. Oliver? Thank you, Dick.
If I might just add a couple of comments on unrelated items or comments you had on the thing. As Commissioner Kim asked about translation language and the cost of that. As an example, we were before the city of Sunnyvale, and we had a project there that required us to help relocate families out of an older apartment place that we had knocked down. We had a translator for Vietnamese, Chinese, and Hispanic at every meeting that we had. The city had to actually pay for the translators at the city council meeting for the public comment, but we were required in our project to meet with those families to help them, and we had to pay for the translators to come and do that to facilitate the kind of language that you saw in those programs there. So it's possible, it's costly, but there's ways to do it, and it's worked very well. And when you get 3 languages and 100 speakers, those meetings went on for 4 hours, and they were very, very difficult. But we accomplished it, and everybody was pleased that we did that. Had we not done that, we could have been subject to a lawsuit by the city could have been, and we could have been for not doing the best effort we could to meet the needs.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public that'd like to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comment. Planning Commissioner, discussion or disclosure of ex parte communication. Does anybody have any ex parte communication they'd like to disclose? Seeing none, we'll move on to discussion and possible action. Commissioner Kim, you have your mic up.
So I don't have any problem with the language that Mr. Oliver has proposed, but does the staff have any issues?
Yeah, that was going to be my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know, the letter, you know, it came tonight. There's no staff report or anything to it. How does this affect? What's the impact of a change like this?
Well, a couple things I wanted to mention. I can't remember if I already said this or not. There's also a city council neighborhood district I did reference it, or policy that's been in effect for quite some time, and I think it kind of mirrors the similar language, requires a specific plan or master plan is actually the language in the council policy. So, Mr. Oliver had referenced the Harvest Park neighborhood at the north end of Gilroy, which is actually in the edge of the same North Gilroy neighborhood district. The council policy has an exception that reads that neighborhood district designated properties within the city urban service area may develop prior to preparation of a specific plan or master plan under some circumstances. So that's the very distinct difference, is just those few, and it's really the Harvest Park, and I don't even remember if there's anything else up there. Well, I think maybe it's one other. We're in the urban service area, so that's the difference. The remainder of the North Neighborhood District and also the Southern Neighborhood District at South Santa Teresa Boulevard and Thomas Road South there is also, again, a neighborhood district and subject to the same requirements for a specific plan or master plan. So we really don't have any particular staff position, I would say, at this time. I mean, the the whole point of a neighborhood district is to be a master plan kind of an area. So that's certainly the reason for the policy and the requirement. So it's something that the city council would have to evaluate and decide if they want us to take any different kind of look at that. I will also mention, though, too, that this neighborhood district policy has a lot of reference to the RDO, which it was implemented together at the same time. So there's very likely to need to be a reevaluation of this, subsequent to the general plan adoption as well.
So I guess I'm wondering, well, let me let the city attorney speak first.
Go ahead,
Oh.
I was just going to make
Yeah.
a recommendation.
Okay. I'm wondering if, if, like in the case of Harvest Park, they developed without doing a specific plan. If this project develops without a specific plan, the whole point of a specific plan is to have neighborhoods that are cohesive and work together. Without the specific plan, how do you get that? Does that just land on staff's shoulders? Or, I mean, a lot of the building that we have around town is kind of incoherent because it was developed a piece here and a piece there with no overall plan. I mean, wouldn't we be setting ourselves up for the same type of development if we just ignore the fact that a specific plan is required?
Yeah, that's, excuse me. Yeah, I said, you're right. That's the whole point of these areas, excuse me, irrespective of numbers of owners and such, but again, greenfield opportunity areas that are large and need some kind of overall master planning at some level for development.
Thank you.
But you can confirm this, or Julie can, that if it's going to be a statutory specific plan, there are financial infrastructure and certain requirements that would be in a statutory specific plan. It's not just the planning and the master planning of it, but infrastructure, how is the water, sewer, roads, how are they all built and how are they all financed? And so I could look it up in my little book, but so that is why they would require a specific plan, is to make sure that there is consistent development and there's adequate infrastructure.
But if we insert this language, then, and the council starts providing these exemptions, then how do we get a master plan development or that includes parks and schools? When the first guy in, Harvest Park, for example, what did they do to provide land for a school or maybe a fire station? I mean, somebody at some point has to do that, and the first guy that gets developed is the guy that's not going to do it, and then it all lands on the last guy. And so I'm wondering if that isn't what the impact of this language would do. All right. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Storga.
So I guess I'm looking for clarification from staff or anyone on the commission who may have overheard the similar comments from, I guess, the mayor saying that this is not a priority. Can someone help me understand that? Because I can understand an applicant, hesitating to, wait a minute, I have to undertake this massive investment with the hopes that someday the city will take this to LAFCO. That seems simply unfair, for lack of a better word. So can you help me understand that?
Certainly. So it is as if anyone's at the planning commission meeting where you all were, most of you were at, Melissa, our planner, indicated that processing the USA amendment was in the city's best interest because we would eventually run out of vacant land. With the state requirements, with the RENA allocation, we will require additional land for housing development. So I foresee that it's not something that the city would put off for a very long time because we currently have a 5-year vacant land inventory and we're pretty much out of land. That being said, it does have to be prioritized, put on a planning work program, and identified for staff time. So that's what the mayor was referring to in terms of prioritization. We have a lot of other projects that are in the works currently. So we would need to carve out the time for that. I don't have a kind of timeline as of yet. We have requested that the city administrator work with the council to prioritize this project for us.
I would comment that I watched that council meeting and that portion of the meeting at home, and I did hear the mayor's comment, but I also heard him ask the city administrator if that would be done by the end of this year, and he seemed to indicate that it would be worked into the work plan to be completed by the end of this year. Any other questions, comments? Okay, the chair is open for a motion on this resolution.
Just a clarification, if we wish to incorporate Mr. Oliver's language, do we include that in the motion?
I would imagine you could.
Yes, you could have the text, the resolution, the proposed public draft 2040 general plan policy text with the additional language proposed by Mr. Oliver, or you could do one motion to adopt the resolution recommending the council approve the public, the proposed draft. Then you could do a second motion with that you would want the council to review and consider that policy change. So you have options. So those, you could separate them, you could do it all at once. But,
I would comment here that I'm not going to support this request from Mr. Oliver. I'd like more information from staff or more research done on how that's going to impact or might impact the overall development in that area. It's not that I want to create an extra burden on the developer, but I'm concerned about, in the past, the way the city has developed before we started doing these specific plans was, the first guy in would build something, and then the next guy in would build something, and when they got to the last guy, he couldn't build because he was the guy that had to provide all the other services. And so I'm not going to support this. The council may have a different concept, but I'm not going to support this tonight.
If I may, if we pass, this is more of a procedural question. If we pass the plan without consideration of Mr. Oliver's recommendation, can the Planning Commission come back after staff report and recommendation and so forth and modify and add this language or some other language in later?
No, I believe not, because if the council adopts the policy document, then it would require a general plan amendment.
Right.
Mr. Chair, if I could, again, what the action we're requesting of the commission and ultimately the council next month is to basically accept this language as what we're proposing as the general plan to go off and write the EIR, bring back in the fall for final adoption. So technically, changes can continue to occur until preparation for final adoption.
Thank you. I stand corrected.
So if I could just get a clarification, since you volunteered additional information, is it better at this point to try to incorporate this language, or is it better to wait until all the other work's been done and there's been other reviews and now the staff has a better language to insert?
No, I think what staff would request is that the commission take whatever action you choose in terms of recommending regarding this language, make a recommendation to the council. If you have particular wording, that's fine. We'll report whatever you recommend tonight and bring it forward to the council. So, the more we can be including content now, I think is better.
So at this point, the staff is neutral on Mr. Oliver's language.
Right. I mean, we're gonna need to look at it, I would think, as well. I think Chair Fisher is correct that we should bring to the council some information around the potential impact of this kind of change.
So if the Planning Commission does not take action on Mr. Oliver's language, would Mr. Oliver have a second shot at the City Council to try to get this language inserted?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Sounds simple.
You know, one more thing I'd like to comment on, not regarding this. I'm going to talk about the general plan policy document itself. I'm going to support that tonight, that we pass it through as recommended. I've been on the general plan update committee since September of 2013. So it's taken 6.5 years to get this far. And there's like 35 members on that committee, is that right? So 35 members of the community worked for the past 6.5 years to get this document to where it is, and it passed unanimously out of the general plan committee. So I'm very much recommending and in favor of supporting this tonight. Thank you.
I have a comment if I can.
Certainly.
So the 6.5 years of review was before SB 1000, correct?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So you made a comment that you wouldn't be able to support Mr. Oliver's suggested wording there. I'm not in a position to support either parts of this because I don't think that, I mean, this SB 1000 to me has put a big curveball on this. And the number one thing for me is there's not enough information to accurately identify what SB 1000 actually requires. And we've offered to do several bullet point items to try and appear like we're complying with this, and we don't know how much that costs and where it fits into our budget. There's just not enough information. I mean, I thoroughly appreciate the 6 years that all of you folks put into it, and I probably would be in a position to support it if it were on its own. But unfortunately, at kind of the last minute here, we're forced to comply with another Senate bill that to me puts too big of a curveball in it. So that's my only comment.
Thank you. I guess I would say that, you know, we could send this back to the general plan committee and have them try to address that issue. And 6 months from now, when we get it done, there'll be a new state law. Yeah, I mean, the legislature is in the business right now of passing laws that affect development. And we're never going to be able to keep up with this. If there's an issue, in my view, if there's an issue after the fact, then that's when you amend your plan. Thank you.
And I'll just add that so many of the bills coming out now, they're all unfunded state mandates. So they, you know, yes. So
I would also add that the general plan is a 20-year document. It's a dynamic document. We can amend it, and over 20 years, a lot could happen.
Mr. Oliver, we have the public hearing has been closed.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you close the public comment, so if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong.
Do you have something brief to say?
Yes, I was just
please go ahead.
that you do what Commissioner Kim suggested, have two motions, one to approve it, the one item, and one to approve that way my item gets before the city council to be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the chair is open to a motion regarding the resolution on the general plan. Commissioner Kim?
I move that we adopt a resolution recommending the city council approve the proposed public review draft 2040 general plan policy text, and then I'll have a follow-up motion after the vote.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Kim, did you want to mark?
Is there?
I don't see it on the.
Oh, mover.
There you go. Commissioner Kim is the mover. Do we have a second?
And you read it off just like this? Okay, I'll second.
I have a second from Commissioner Rudin. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. This is a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Morales Medina,
Yes.
Vice Chair Astorga,
Yes.
Commissioner Doyle,
No.
Chair Fisher,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim,
Yes.
Commissioner Rudin,
Yes.
Commissioner Fleming.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries 6-1.
So if you're going to make a subsequent motion about recommending this language to the city council, it won't be a resolution, it will just be a motion for the city council to consider the additional language, and that would just be a voice vote, not a resolution.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend to the city council Mr. Dick Oliver's phrase to be inserted, as indicated as an email. Exceptions to allow portions of the entire neighborhood may proceed upon approval of the city council on showing of need or otherwise to meet RHNA or state requirements.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Kim, a second by Commissioner Fleming. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll just do it.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Commissioner Fisher, is this, or Chair Fisher, I'm sorry, this is just to bring it before council, correct?
Yes, a recommendation for the council to
just-
insert the language.
To insert it or consider it?
Commissioner Kim?
To insert the language, but, so
Okay.
they can vote yes or no.
But that would bring more staff research before, it, or is it as presented to us?
It is, I move the motion as presented by Mr. Oliver.
Any further discussion?
I'm sorry,
Commissioner Fabian
I'm a little confused
Morales.
here. We're making a motion to recommend for the council to consider as presented by,
Yes.
okay.
The motion is to recommend that the council consider inserting the language as proposed by Mr. Oliver. Commissioner Doyle?
And then does it come back to us if they insert the language?
No.
So it's more than inserting the language, it's including it in the general plan.
No, it's a recommendation for the council to consider inserting the language. The council makes the final decision. Council always makes the final decision.
Right, I understand, but we're recommending that they insert the language or
If you vote in
consider.
favor of it, then you're recommending the council consider inserting the language. If they vote to insert it, it's in.
I see, okay.
And the council will not be adopting the general plan at their meeting. They will be accepting the policy document for study under CEQA. And the adoption would come back in the fall.
Right, the whole package goes out for environmental review. Right.
So just a clarification on that. Let's assume this motion passes as well. The council is not obligated to take this verbatim. The staff can then recommend rewording, whatever, beyond what I made the motion as. Okay.
I don't understand it the same way, where we can't take that type of action and then trigger staff work. We've seen that with several other items here. So I understand the resolution to be as written, plug and play like a Lego. So I think if there was a way to make a friendly amendment to have the council explore the intent of the message here, I think that's fair because they can wordsmith it as they choose. But something like that would be.
As a maker of the motion, I would be agreeable to that modification.
Then you're going to have to rephrase your motion so everybody can understand it.
If it pleases the Planning Commission, I would like to, and the second mover, I'd like to rephrase my motion to state that the staff generate a language that meets the spirit of Mr. Oliver's recommendation.
I don't think we can direct staff like that.
No, we can't. We can't direct
That we
staff.
recommend that the council consider the intent of the proposed changes by
Okay.
Mr. Oliver.
All right. I got it. Okay, so I'd like to restate the motion that the council consider the intent of Mr. Oliver's statement.
My second hasn't
Agreeable?
changed. We're still on the same second. I'm seconding it still.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion? Any other comments? This will be a voice vote. Please call roll. Just
Commissioner Morales Medina,
Yes.
Vice Chair Astorga,
Yes.
Commissioner Doyle,
No.
Chair Fisher,
no.
Commissioner Kim,
Yes.
Commissioner Rudin,
Yes.
Commissioner Fleming.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries 5-2.
With, you need to say who the noes are. You should
Oh,
probably.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The noes are Chair Fisher and Commissioner Doyle.
Yes.
Next item up is new business, selection of a planning commission chair and vice chair for 2020. Staff report.
It is customary at the beginning of the year, at the first regular meeting of the Planning Commission, that a chair and vice chair are selected. So staff looks to the commission to